Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about Narja. More specifically, we'll be breaking down her cards, her potential, her upgrade priority, her build, her teams, and some pros and cons. But without further ado, let's get straight into it. So to start things off, Narja has a bit of a weird sort of kit, as despite being another controller character, she does technically have a variety of different skills or effects that she actually can be played with. Now, to start things off though, let's actually break down her cards. Her first card, as you could probably see, is just a generic damage dealing ability. It does scale off of defense, which is something that will affect how you, of course, build or scale your character. But next, she effectively has 2 heals alongside a buff effect, which it's technically not a buff effect, but this is actually how she continues to, or one of the ways that she can build veracity. Veracity, as you're reading on screen right now, reads that when hitting with an attack card, there's a 40% fixed heal, and if health is 50% or higher, you gain 30% damage dealt by attack cards, which is something that can be rather applied or affected by, well, I should say, it is something that you can affect or apply through your supports or through the other characters on your team. Now, in terms of this, of course, the fixed healing and the heal are both pretty self-explanatory. But next, we have the first card that can actually have an epiphany, which is Shackles of Hunger. Now, again, Shackles of Hunger by itself is already pretty cool. Number one, because it's a multi-hit ability, and as we'll see in a moment, having multi-hit abilities is pretty nice in terms of what you're looking to do with Narja in general. But before we even break down a lot of these cards, she really is one of the most broad or diverse characters that we've seen in terms of how you'll be playing her. Not just because she is a support that could, in some cases, be used and paired alongside certain characters or played or built differently to suit a specific DPS in that sort of sense as a support, but also because through a lot of her skills and abilities, she can actually be a DPS herself, be somewhat of a healer, or even just be a generic card slash buffer slash discount, pretty much anything you really want her to be. With this, as you're seeing right now, if you do have the attunement, which means that if you draw the card, you are able to activate or receive the 4 veracity effect, which is cool. But as we actually go into the epiphany effect, this is a card that has a lot of different value. Now, from what I've seen, I found that this specific skill here, which reads that you're able to decrease the veracity by a max of 5, but in exchange you have 40% damage increase to the next used attack card for each amount decreased, is pretty insane. To add to this, as you're reading here, we have another buff effect here, which is predation, and this reads that if you have 5 of the veracity decreased, you have an increase of 3 predation. Now, this is a lot of different text and different buffs to account for, but effectively all you need to know is that having the both, or rather, I should say, having both veracity and predation together is a pretty insane amount of damage, I would say, but keep in mind that, especially when it comes to predation specifically, this isn't necessarily an effect that you'll be able to keep up permanently or have on 24/7. And this is actually part of the reason why multi-hit cards are a bit deceiving when it comes to Narja specifically, as at least from my understanding, I thought that predation here read that you would only be able to reduce predation by 1 per attack card. However, this is not, as far as I understand, the way that it actually works, and instead, if an attack card has multi-hits, you actually continuously decrease your predation instead. Now, to add to this of course does have a retain card, and this does add a bit of value, as you can wait until you have a an insane hand, or right before your battle ravage, especially if you're using this with a character like Serenial, if you're trying to stack up a bunch of turns or a bunch of cards to have a really big damage window. But that isn't the only card that you can use or the only effect of this. There is also a shielding effect here, which again just really does add to its add to Narja's insane pretty much possibilities that she has here. You of course could also take a more damage dealing route here. You could also take this one right here, which gives you an increased attunement of 2 additional veracity, while also increasing the number of times that you hit with said ability. And again, depending on how you're trying to play the Narja deck that you're using, this has so many different open-ended possibilities. Now, the next card we should actually talk about, or I guess not card, is the ego skill here, and this is, of course, her ultimate. Now, beyond the 10 veracity, which is huge, because again, the more veracity you have, the more you're able to, of course, or the longer you're able to maintain this effect effectively. Alongside the 10 veracity, you also have 250% defense based damage, and if mealtime is in the graveyard, you get 5 predation. Now, mealtime is an entirely very interesting and very unique card that we'll go over as well, but as you're seeing here, 10 veracity, 5 predation, this is a pretty good way to stack up her 2 buffs. And again, though of course it is also a fairly expensive card at 5 cost, as you'll see, being able to stack up all of these veracity and predation stacks before you have a really insane hand, especially at no cost AP wise to yourself, is pretty huge. And though other ego skills, maybe something like Serennials or even some of the partner cards may have value, and by the way, we'll talk about we'll briefly touch on the partner skill or the partner value later, but in terms of this, having a non AP costing stacker for her resources is pretty huge, and also in most cases I would say this is probably one of the higher priority skills that you will likely use, especially if you're using someone like Narja for damage, but even just in general, if you're trying to use Narja to stack up her abilities to give more value to the team, great ego skill, not much else to say about it. Now, as we move to Bottomless Hunger, this is another really interesting card for a number of reasons. First and foremost, if we take a look at the epiphanies, there are, again, so many different variations of this card that you can use or that are pretty viable. The first of which, one gives you additional veracity, or rather 3 veracity here, and it reads that the next 2 times the veracity is activated, you decrease the cost of 1 random card in hand by 1 for 1 turn. Now, by itself, you're already seeing that this is somewhat of a discount card, pretty solid, pretty interesting, and though it's not necessarily the exact same as being given a raw 2 AP, it is effectively 2 AP, especially in the right hand. Now, again, as a disclaimer to that, there are times where you'll reduce the cost of something like a random heal or a random barrier that you don't really want, which is why in some cases I'd argue the reduced cost here is not necessarily the same. But this next card here, which is the 0 cost Bottomless Hunger that decreases the cost of 2 random cards by 1, is pretty interesting. Now, first and foremost, this doesn't have some sort of lead, retain, or unique effect to it, which has pros and cons. Now, for a card like this, it would be amazing if you were able to more reliably hold on to it, either through something like a retain, or if you were able to guarantee it in hand so that you can guarantee receive this at some point in your deck. But even without that, not having lead and not having something like initiation, whatever they want to call the term at this point, is totally fine, I think, for this card. Again, the 2 AP is pretty interesting, not only because, again, you're able to reduce the cost of anything in your hand, and you're effectively being a pseudo Ray buffer or a similar Ray sort of buffer. This is also not even one of the cards that she necessarily has to focus on if you were going to play her for effectively, okay, let me restate that. Though this 2 AP reduction or this 2 AP discount is pretty effective, something that I also think is really cool about the Bottomless Hunger base generic card is that you can increase or improve this to the Bottomless Hunger skill that you're seeing here on the far right. Now, this is something, again, that you'll probably see a lot of people reference or talk about, especially because effectively every time that you are able to activate Veracity, this increases the total damage dealt on the next mealtime. Now, Veracity, if it was only applicable or applicable through your own cards, would be kind of meh, but thankfully this isn't the case. And actually, if you have a character like Serennial paired with Narja, who they did tease and kind of showcase off, you're actually able to stack this in insane amount. And with this, as a result, if you're able to continuously stack Veracity and then activate Mealtime, Mealtime is a kind of do-it-all card. Most of her cards kind of have a specific use case, and despite her being a very general character who can heal, deal damage, shield, etc., this, or I should say Mealtime specifically, is the all-in-one card. It does deal damage, it deals healing, and again, I won't tease too much about this, but the ability to stack the damage of Mealtime is pretty insane, again, because you are, in most cases, when you play someone like Serennial, stacking up an insane amount of the homing lasers, or allowing you to rupture and apply, or rather gain or generate a bunch of cards yourself. But even for the others, as you can see, you can read there's a unique card here for the upgrade, which reads, when Veracity is activated 3 times in a turn, you can decrease the cost of 1 random card in hand by 1 until used, and this is once per turn. Now, again, whether or not you want to use some of these other ones is totally fine, but I think it's probably worth mentioning or worth visiting or talking about Mealtime right now so you have a better idea of what we're talking about. Now, Mealtime reads that when veracity, or rather if veracity is decreased, you decrease the cost by 1 and you add a 30% HP amount up to a max of 10 until used, and on top of this you also have 160% defense based damage to all enemies with an additional heal and an added for predation here. Now, by itself, already this is a pretty insane card, not only because it kind of feels similar to one of the other Tunnel of Insanity, or rather one of the tunnel cards, specifically where you're able to reduce the cost. I can't remember offhand exactly what it's called. Actually, I'm going to see if I can find it in one of my hands. Maybe I can find it. I'm fairly sure I have it in one of my decks. Yes, this. The Forbidden Ecstasy of Violence. This kind of feels similar, or Mealtime does feel kind of similar to that, in the sense that this is yet another ability which technically has an insane amount of scaling if you're able to meet the conditions, or play with these specific conditions that the card is asking for. In this case specifically, being able to, of course, decrease the veracity of, or decrease your veracity stacks is something that is pretty much core to Narja's gameplay, and it's something that she does all the time, basically, so long as she's paired with other allies. But as you're reading here, veracity, or rather Mealtime's damage, can not only scale pretty high with the previous card that we saw before, it can also scale in terms of healing. This effectively makes Mealtime a pretty big core of her gameplay, and core in terms of what she focuses on, as again, this is a pretty huge amount of healing and a pretty big nuke that again isn't just single target, this is an AoE nuke. Now again, how many of these abilities, or how many times you'll really be able to stack Mealtime, especially if you're using someone like Serennial, before you end up just one-shotting anything everyone, or one-shotting everything anyway, because Serennial's already using, like, at that point, probably like 10 to 12 missiles before it becomes significant. That's completely up for debate. But if we move to another card in the form of Voluntary Control, this is another card that has pretty good value here. There are different variations of how you could use this card. One of the ways that I found this to be pretty cool, though, is you could end up using this with someone like Chizuru or Mei Lin, and with this specifically, if you're able to stack up all of the veracity and the predation, this is probably a card that you'll want to stack up continuously, of course, for the added value, not only just so that you can obviously keep the buffs, but in terms of the other, I guess, like variations of Voluntary Control, you can see there are a lot of different iterations of the card that also change the way that Narja supports. This one reads, if Mealtime is in the draw pile, you can move it to your hand, and if it's in the graveyard, you get 3 morale for 1 turn. Additionally, you have another one including this veracity one, which reads that you can select 1 attack card, and you get 1 predation every time that the card is moved to your hand. Now, again, this is pretty insane, not only just for the 10 veracity, but because you can actually pair this with Serennial specifically, and you can force one of her homing laser cards specifically to be tied to this effect. And again, if you're able to get one of these Serennial homing laser cards that reads something along the effect, or along the lines of something like move to your hand at the start of turn, as I'm sure a lot of you are probably familiar with, this one specifically, where you ravage, or rather on ravage, or at the start of the turn, you move your card to your hand. This effectively allows you to, again, continuously maintain a lot of the predation stacks that specifically for Voluntary Control, of course, you're able to then use for damage and maintain your buffs. Now, that isn't even the only one that you necessarily have to consider either, as even this one, which reads, each time a basic card inflicts a hit, you have 1 veracity and a plus 50% damage amount increase to basic attack cards. This one is obviously not nearly as good as the last one, especially if you're using it specifically with Serennial, but in terms of characters, or how different they've really made the cards, or the different possibilities that are available for Serennial, or rather for Narja, alongside a lot of the different DPSs that she has access to, yes, this really is a character who has so much variety, or so much open-endedness in terms of how you'll want to play her. The final card, Domain of Veracity, is actually not a really amazing card, to be honest. Pretty much all of the epiphanies that you see here are kind of they're whatever, I guess. You could in some cases use this or use one of the epiphanies here if you want to deal more damage, as that's effectively what you're seeing here in terms of the value of the card. But I actually found that the Domain of Veracity here at the end is probably the best card here, and similar to, again, the more utility focused, or arguably so if you're trying to use someone like Narja for her utility, being able to heal every time that you use Mealtime is also nice, as again, you stack this heal on top of her already existing heal, and there's an insane amount of healing that you get in one burst, again, assuming that you are able to stack and get the most out of Mealtime before you actually use it. That was a mouthful, I apologize, but really, there are an infinite amount of computations, permutations, variations of Narja that you could play, and I apologize, as I wish I could just give you a very specific set of details or guidelines for how to play her, but really my mind is going like a million miles an hour trying to think up every single possible variation of the card or of the cards that you can see here so they can, I guess, fit one of the supports that you're looking to play. But long story short, what I would definitely recommend is removing the defense, or rather the defense attack card here, all these basics effectively, in order to only have important cards like the Shackles of Hunger, the Bottomless Hunger, the Voluntary Control alongside Mealtime. And even if you're using this character to just be a supportive or utility character, in a lot of cases just having these cards and removing all these three is still going to be pretty valuable, especially with her more supportive role, though again, this can change if you're trying to play her as a DPS. Now, I won't go too far on talking about the partners here, but what I will say is that from my initial testing and experience with Gaia, this is a pretty crazy card. Not only, again, because you're able to pretty cheap cost wise be able to use an ego skill that allows you to draw an attack card while also dealing a multi-hit attack in this case, but also because in terms of the stats or the value that you get out of Gaia, this not only increases the combatant's defense, again, pretty nice for a defense scaler, you also have increased defense-based damage assigned to the combatant's instinct cards, which of course makes sense because, well, that's what Narja is. Now, in terms of this, there is also the effect of when using a unique attack card of the assigned combatant with an original cost of 6, which again obviously directly correlates to Mealtime. This also means that you get an increase to damage amount of all allies by 20%. So this partner card already pretty insane. I won't go too far in detail about the value of it, just because, spoiler alert, that's another video. But if I were you, I don't necessarily think I would need to pull for Gaia. I think she's going to be good, especially if you pull Gaia, but it's a cool card, or rather a cool partner card, and the effect alongside the ego skill are both pretty valuable. Now, in terms of my save data, I haven't had an insane amount of time myself to really fish out a bunch of different decks for Narja, but from what I've seen, a lot of the cards that I've gotten currently feel really nice, but as you're seeing, I wasn't able to, again, have the RNG or luck to both remove all the cards at the same time while also being able to get the exact effects that I want. But even from what I see right now, these are effectively what I found to be fairly valuable in terms of my deck. I was able to fortunately get a Divine Epiphany with, you know, obviously allowing me to give myself a draw here, but generally speaking, I didn't necessarily feel super insane with her with this initial deck when I tried to use it outside of the chaos or rather zero systems. But rather, what I did actually notice while using this save data instead is that it felt really odd for me to effectively have an all-in-one character, because as you're seeing here, I was at times still able to use some of the healing here, which is not the worst, even though it does cost 1 AP to cost, or rather 1 AP to use. But at the same time, whenever I was able to stack this Bottomless Hunger, I was doing like an absolutely diabolical amount of damage on Mealtime, especially if I stack these like together. But the reality here as well is that even when I used her just for the buffing and I was focusing more on Serennial as the DPS, again, I had an insane amount of damage come out of Serennial, but whether that's just Serennial herself already one-shotting everything, and whether the predation or even these other effects really finds value here, I think is kind of debatable. Now, before I actually go further about talking about my initial thoughts about her value, I actually want to talk about her potentials, as there are obviously a few things I wish I had upgraded, but as usual, this thing costs infinity and a half. Now, first and foremost, being able to add the veracity here to the heal effect, okay, that's fine. Admittedly, I don't think this is necessarily a card that you'll always keep. And rather, these other nodes that you're seeing here, the increased heal amount to Narja's heal, and if you have, again, above a certain amount of defense, you add another modifier to this, only effectively adds, I guess, decent or added effect or added value if you're trying to heal. And again, this isn't necessarily a bad thing, especially if you're having to comb through a lot of the initial phases of Chaos Zero with, or rather of Zero System. I don't know why I keep calling it Chaos Zero, but of Zero System with Narja. But finally, I do actually think that this 10% added amount of veracity is what I've been, oh, actually, I just realized I can merge. Ooh, perfect. This is something that I was waiting to upgrade. I thought I wouldn't have enough because I didn't have enough energy from the day. But this, I think, is going to be absolutely insane for her. In terms of the other cards that you're seeing here, or the other nodes that you're seeing here, there are obviously a bit of damage-focused nodes here too, while also giving her defense. Now, of course, the defense here is a two-way sort of value added to her stats. It doesn't just make her tankier, it also allows her to deal more damage. But effectively, in terms of what I would prioritize in terms of skills, I'm definitely going to be investing a little bit into the basic cards because, well, it doesn't cost nearly as much as you'd probably imagine, especially if you have leftover instinct here. But in terms of the other cards, I definitely am going to be maxing her upgrade card, followed by, of course, the two stats here. Now, in terms of her memory fragments, I have her on a broken 3-piece set at the moment. Healers, Tetras, and Executioners is probably something that you can change depending on, again, what support, what team that you're using her in. I found, however, this 6 slot here, this Tetras Authority, to be pretty interchangeable with this or an Ego variation of this lineup. For the Chaos Zero itself, I think it's totally fine, or I would even imagine it's probably something that would feel better if you use defense here, as it does definitely allow you to clear out or deal a bit more damage. But as you get into something like a save data, or especially if you're trying to use her specifically as a support, you would naturally change this to an ego manifest or an ego recovery specific main stat, which I think is fine. But in terms of the teams that I've been using with her, and honestly, even from what you've probably seen recommendation wise, using someone like Narja or Narja in basically any sort of lineup works, as again, she's effectively a Rey or Mika hybrid, and that's effectively where I've used her. If you want to use her alongside someone like Chizuru and Mei Lin, I think that also works fairly fine. If you want to use her alongside someone like even Yuki, or even if you want to use her alongside Serenial, I think those work too. But as a bit of a side note to this, if you are using someone like Serenial alongside, or if you are using someone like the Narja alongside a Serenial, it does feel like someone, or having another card drawer like someone like Veronica would be pretty nice, but unfortunately for me, I don't have that specifically. So what I've been trying to test out is using her more with, of course, someone like Selena, as well, no Veronica on my team right now. That said though, guys, in terms of honestly how I feel about Narja from like the, at this point, the increased or the number of like random chaos manifestations and the different content that I've done with her, she does feel like a different sort of variation of a Mika. And though I am, and although I am trying to use her a lot in the similar Mika slot as a pseudo Rey, it does still feel like I don't necessarily have quite enough AP at times, or it does feel like sometimes things don't line up nearly as brainlessly as some of the other characters in the game do. And with this, I don't necessarily think that Narja is bad by any means. That is absolutely not what I would label her as, but it does feel like, at least for the moment, it does feel like she is a way more intentional sort of character that you have to be very mindful of, not only in terms of how you build her, but even in terms of where you take her or and why you take her. Now, again, you could argue that's maybe the case for a lot of other supports in the game too, but I've definitely found with characters like Mika or Cassius, after you get a certain baseline of a character, it feels like everything else is kind of just extra. With this, I don't know if I'd necessarily say Narja or Narja is the same, as again, it feels like, at least at the moment, if you have a setup that isn't suited for buffing or discounting cards, and you're trying to take more field time, or if you're trying to use more damage with Narja, and you're trying to pair her alongside a character who does end up spending or using more of the AP on the team, it doesn't feel like necessarily the both of them will necessarily synergize well together. But again, in terms of if I were to describe her playstyle or even my performance with her, in 3 words, it's probably okay, I can't do it in 3 words. A different version of Rey, a different version of Mika. Technically, that's about how I feel about her, though. In terms of pros and cons, though, I think her greatest strength is that her Chaos Zero performance right now, I think is Chaos Zero. Oh my god, my experience with her is that her zero system performance is extremely comfortable. It's very rare, I would say, to find a character who can effectively heal, deal damage, and also affect the costs of your cards. So really, it's like a mashup of someone, again, like Mika, Rey, and even Kalipe, as her damage is not something to overlook. But otherwise, I do think that her flaws definitely come in trying to find the perfect deck for her. And even though they've definitely made improvements to the zero system in order for it to be an easier time to farm out, it definitely feels like you'll have to spend a little bit farming or finding the perfect deck for her. And otherwise, I think that she does have maybe I guess she'll probably have a better time, especially in things like the tower or in future or basin type content where you're able to more pre-plan or reroll for a perfect run. As otherwise, I think at the moment, though we've already lost some of the more seasonal content where maybe we have to consider something like having 2 sides, in the specific way that we had it before. I think Narja is going to be fine. She's definitely felt very good for me, at least, but in terms of whether or not I'll be able to replace some of the other characters, especially if I got someone like Veronica, or if I'm able to replace someone like Cassius, don't think that's necessarily the case. And otherwise, I think even compared to someone like Mika, she's okay, but I can definitely see why some players may find some difficulty in trying to replace Mika's raw AP or constant wave into raw AP generation, as opposed to a discounting, or in terms of Narja just being more of a DPS herself. That's going to be it for today's video, though, guys. I apologize. I know this is a bit of a rant, but I tried to give as much of how I felt or what I was thinking during my experience with Narja day 1 to try and put it into words for you to understand. Feel free, of course, to ask questions in the comment section below, but thanks again for watching. I'll see you on the next one. Stay safe, stay healthy. Good night.